I arrived home from my construction job to find my parents frantically packing suitcases. My sister Amanda's birthday was tomorrow, and they were preparing for a weekend getaway to Lake Tahoe, the family tradition for 23 years. I searched everywhere for my luggage, growing increasingly confused. When I asked where my bags were, my mother Sandra coldly pointed to Amanda's unfinished college thesis, scattered across the dining table. Someone has to finish your sister's work. Stay home and be useful for once. I stood frozen, realizing my parents were abandoning me to complete Amanda's senior project while she celebrated. The front door slammed shut behind them, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt foreign. I stared at the scattered papers covering our dining table, each page representing another piece of Amanda's environmental engineering thesis. The irony wasn't lost on me. Environmental engineering was exactly what I had studied before dropping out to support this family financially. I picked up the first page, scanning the introduction about sustainable water management systems. The terminology felt familiar because I had learned it myself 3 years ago at Colorado State University. Back then, I was the promising student with a full academic scholarship, passionate about designing eco-friendly infrastructure that could transform communities. That all changed when Dad got his pink slip from the manufacturing plant where he had worked for 15 years. Mom's part-time job at the local grocery store barely covered utilities, and Amanda was already halfway through her expensive private college education. Someone had to step up, and as usual, that someone was me. Walking through our modest ranch house, I could see the evidence of my sacrifice everywhere. The new laptop Amanda needed for her coursework, purchased with my first construction paycheck. The dining room furniture Mom had wanted to replace, bought with overtime money I earned working weekend shifts. Even the paint on the walls came from my savings account applied during my rare days off. Amanda had never questioned where the money came from. She simply accepted that her tuition would always be paid, her textbooks would always appear, and her living expenses would always be covered. Meanwhile, I traded my dreams of designing sustainable buildings for the reality of building them with my hands, watching other people's architectural visions come to life while mine gathered dust. I opened Amanda's laptop to examine her thesis more closely. The document was titled Innovative Approaches to Urban Water Conservation, a comprehensive analysis of green infrastructure implementation. Reading through her work, something strange began to surface. The writing style felt uncomfortably familiar, as did many of the technical concepts and research approaches. Curious, I navigated to Amanda's desktop and found a folder labeled Research Materials. Inside were dozens of files with names like Karl's Notes, Water Systems, Karl's Research Papers, and Naga Environmental Engineering Projects, K. My heart began to race as I opened file after file, discovering my own college work that I had left behind when I dropped out. There were my detailed analyses of permeable pavement systems, my research on bioswales and rain gardens, even my incomplete thesis proposal on integrated stormwater management. Amanda had taken everything, every late-night study session, every breakthrough moment, every original idea I had developed during my time at university. But it went deeper than simple reference material. Comparing her thesis to my old work, I could see entire paragraphs lifted directly from my research papers. Her methodology section was nearly identical to an approach I had developed for a class project. Even her citations list included sources I had painstakingly compiled during my own studies. I moved to Amanda's desk and began searching through her physical files. Hidden behind her textbooks was a manila folder containing printed copies of my original college assignments. In her handwriting, she had made notes in the margins. Use this for Chapter 3. Perfect for literature review. Adapt methodology here. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. For the past 4 years, while I had been sacrificing my education and career prospects to keep this family afloat, Amanda had been systematically stealing my intellectual property to maintain her perfect grade point average. Every academic achievement she celebrated, every scholarship she received, every opportunity that opened up for her had been built on the foundation of my stolen work. I thought about all those times Mom and Dad had praised Amanda's brilliance at the dinner table. "She's so naturally gifted," Mom would say. "Takes after her mother's side of the family." Dad would add with pride. Meanwhile, they treated my construction work like some kind of unfortunate necessity, a temporary situation until Amanda graduated and could support the family with her superior education. The worst part was realizing that Mom and Dad knew about this arrangement. They had to know. They were the ones who insisted I leave my college materials behind when I moved back home, claiming we needed the space for Amanda's expanding academic needs. They were the ones who encouraged me to help Amanda with her studies whenever she struggled with technical concepts. They were the ones who suggested that my experience in environmental engineering made me the perfect tutor for her challenging coursework. But this wasn't tutoring. This was wholesale theft of my academic identity, enabled and encouraged by parents who had decided that one child's future mattered more than the others. Standing in our living room watching through the window, as neighbors loaded their own cars for weekend getaways, I felt completely invisible. The family that I had sacrificed everything to support had just driven away, without me leaving me to complete yet another task that would benefit Amanda's future, while further cementing my role as the family servant. The Lake Tahoe tradition had been my favorite part of childhood. Every year we would pack the car with camping gear and drive 5 hours to spend Amanda's birthday weekend at the lake. We would hike the trails, swim in the crystal clear water, and roast marshmallows around the campfire while Dad told stories about his own childhood adventures. Now they were continuing that tradition without me treating my absence like an acceptable casualty in their pursuit of Amanda's academic success. I wasn't even worth a discussion or a compromise. I was simply expected to stay behind and be useful, like a piece of furniture that serves its function and requires no consideration. But as I stood there surrounded by the evidence of years of systematic exploitation, something inside me began to shift. The sadness and hurt I had carried for so long started to transform into something sharper and more focused. For the first time in years, I began to see my situation clearly, not as a temporary sacrifice for family unity, but as a deliberate pattern of manipulation that had robbed me of my own identity and future. The thesis deadline was in 48 hours. Amanda expected to return from her birthday celebration to find her stolen work, polished and ready for submission just like always. But maybe it was time for things to change. I needed to understand the full scope of what Amanda had been doing, so I decided to examine her laptop more thoroughly. She had left it open, still logged into all her accounts, a careless habit that was about to reveal far more than she ever intended. Opening her email, I began scrolling through months of correspondence with professors, classmates, and our parents. What I discovered made my previous shock seem trivial by comparison. This wasn't just academic theft, it was a systematic campaign of character assassination that had been running for years. In a folder labeled Family Stuff, I found dozens of email exchanges between Amanda and our parents that painted a completely different picture of our family dynamics. According to Amanda's version of events, I wasn't the sacrificial older brother who had given up everything to support the family. Instead, I was a lazy, unmotivated dropout who chose construction work because I lacked the intelligence and drive for higher education. One email to Mom from 2 years ago read, "I'm worried about Karl's attitude lately. He seems resentful about helping with my studies, and I think he's jealous of my academic success. Maybe you should talk to him about taking more responsibility around the house instead of complaining all the time." Another message to Dad from last spring. "Karl made another comment about wanting to go back to school, but honestly, I don't think he has what it takes. He struggled even with basic concepts when he was at Colorado State, and that was with all the help he could get. It might be better to encourage him toward a trade certification program instead." But the most damaging emails were the ones where Amanda actively discouraged our parents from supporting any of my attempts to improve my situation. When I had mentioned wanting to take evening classes at the community college, Amanda wrote, "I think Karl is looking for an excuse to avoid working full time. The family needs his income right now, and part time school would just distract him from his responsibilities." When I had talked about applying for a supervisor position at the construction company, Amanda's response was, "Karl doesn't really have leadership qualities. He's better suited for following directions than giving them. Plus, the extra responsibility might stress him out." Reading these emails, I realized that every conversation I had tried to have with mom and dad about my future had been filtered through Amanda's poisonous interpretation of my character and capabilities. She had systematically convinced them that I was content with my situation, incapable of better things, and potentially resentful of her success. But Amanda's manipulation went far beyond family relationships. Digging deeper into her email history, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. She had been actively sabotaging my attempts to find better employment. I found a folder labeled K's Job Stuff, containing correspondence with several companies where I had applied for positions. Amanda had somehow obtained contact information for hiring managers and human resources departments, and she had been sending them unsolicited character references about me. One email sent to a renewable energy company, where I had applied for an entry-level engineering position, read, "I understand my brother Karl has applied for a position with your company. As his sister, I feel obligated to share some concerns about his reliability and work ethic. He has a history of starting projects without finishing them, and he left his previous educational program without completing his degree. Additionally, there have been some issues with substance use that affect his judgment and dependability." Another message sent to an environmental consulting firm. "Karl tends to exaggerate his qualifications and experience. While he did attend college briefly, he struggled academically and left due to performance issues rather than financial constraints as he claims. His technical knowledge is limited, and he often requires significant supervision and guidance." The most devastating was an email sent to a company that had actually called me for an interview 6 months ago. They had seemed genuinely interested in my background and had scheduled a second interview, which they then mysteriously canceled. Now I knew why. I'm writing to provide additional information about Karl's background. He has had some anger management issues in the past and can be difficult to work with when he doesn't get his way. There have also been some concerns about his honesty and integrity, particularly regarding his academic and work history. Every opportunity that had mysteriously disappeared, every interview that had gone nowhere, every application that had vanished into silence, Amanda had been working behind the scenes to destroy my chances before I even knew I had them. But her sabotage wasn't limited to professional opportunities. She had also been undermining my personal relationships and social connections. I found emails where she had contacted former classmates from Colorado State, spreading rumors about why I had really left school. According to Amanda, I hadn't sacrificed my education for family financial needs. I had been forced to leave due to academic probation and behavioral problems. She had even reached out to a girl named Jennifer, whom I had dated briefly 2 years ago, claiming to be concerned about my emotional stability and suggesting that Jennifer might want to reconsider spending time with me. Jennifer had stopped returning my calls shortly after that, and now I understood why. The scope of Amanda's betrayal was breathtaking. She hadn't just stolen my academic work. She had systematically destroyed my reputation, sabotaged my opportunities, and poisoned my relationships with family and friends. All while maintaining the facade of being the supportive younger sister who was simply more gifted and motivated than her troubled older brother. I thought about all the times Amanda had offered to help me with job applications or networking opportunities. Now I realized these weren't genuine offers of assistance. They were intelligence-gathering missions designed to give her inside information about my plans and aspirations so she could more effectively sabotage them. The manipulation was so thorough and sophisticated that it must have taken tremendous planning and effort. While I was working 12-hour days in construction, believing I was sacrificing for family unity, Amanda was spending her free time methodically destroying any possibility that I might escape my designated role as the family's financial provider and emotional scapegoat. But the most painful realization was that our parents had been willing participants in this deception. The emails clearly showed that Amanda was sharing her negative assessments of my character and capabilities with mom and dad, and they were accepting her version of events without question. They believed I was content with construction work because Amanda told them I lacked ambition. They thought I was resentful and jealous because Amanda convinced them I was emotionally immature. Every family dinner where they praised Amanda's achievements while dismissing my contributions, every conversation where they suggested I should be grateful for my simple life instead of reaching for more, all of it had been orchestrated by a sister who needed to keep me trapped in order to maintain her own fraudulent success. Sitting alone in the house they had abandoned for Amanda's birthday celebration, I began to see the past 4 years with complete clarity. I hadn't been supporting a struggling family. I had been funding an elaborate deception designed to steal my future and transfer it to someone else. I wasn't the family failure who had settled for less. I was the victim of a calculated campaign of manipulation that had robbed me of opportunities I didn't even know I'd lost. The evidence was all there in black and white, stored carelessly on a laptop that Amanda had assumed I would never examine. Her arrogance in leaving everything accessible revealed just how completely she had underestimated the brother she had spent years undermining. But Amanda had made a critical mistake. In her effort to control every aspect of my life and future, she had documented her crimes in exhaustive detail. Every sabotaged opportunity, every character assassination, every theft of intellectual property, all of it was preserved in digital form, waiting to be discovered by someone who finally knew what to look for. My hands shook as I closed Amanda's laptop, my mind reeling from the scope of her betrayal. But I needed to understand the complete picture before deciding how to respond. If Amanda had been this systematically deceptive about my character and opportunities, what else might the family be hiding? I made my way to Dad's home office, a converted spare bedroom, where he kept all our financial records and important documents. Growing up, this room had been off limits, but after I started contributing significantly to household expenses, Dad had given me access so I could help manage bills and budget planning. Now I was grateful for that access, because I suspected there were more secrets waiting to be discovered. I started with the filing cabinet where Dad kept tax returns and bank statements. What I found there shattered every assumption I had about our family's financial situation. According to the documents dating back 4 years, we had never been in the dire financial straits that justified my dropping out of college. The pink slip story that had prompted my sacrifice was a complete fabrication. Dad hadn't been laid off from the manufacturing plant. He had accepted a voluntary early retirement package worth $150,000. The paperwork was all there, a lump sum payment pension benefits that began immediately, and healthcare coverage that continued indefinitely. But instead of using this windfall to secure our family's future or help me continue my education, they had hidden the money and allowed me to believe we were struggling. The early retirement package had been deposited into an account I knew nothing about, where it had been earning interest while I worked construction jobs to pay bills that could have been covered 10 times over. Even more shocking was discovering that Dad had been working part-time for the past 3 years as a consultant for his former employer, earning additional income that wasn't disclosed to me. Mom's part-time grocery store job was actually a full-time position as a bookkeeper for a local business, paying significantly more than she had ever admitted. Between Dad's retirement income consulting fees and Mom's real salary, our family was more financially stable than we had been before Dad's supposed job loss. My construction income wasn't keeping us afloat. It was padding their secret savings account. I found bank statements showing regular deposits of my monthly contributions to household expenses, but instead of using this money for bills, they had been transferring it to a separate savings account labeled Amanda's Future Fund. Over 4 years, my earnings had accumulated to over $60,000, all earmarked for Amanda's post-graduation plans. The paper trail revealed their true intentions. There were printed emails discussing Amanda's graduate school prospects, internship opportunities, and even plans to use my contributed savings as a down payment for her first house after graduation. They had been systematically stealing my labor and sacrifice to build Amanda's future while convincing me that I was helping the family survive a temporary crisis. But the financial deception went even deeper. I discovered that they had been claiming me as a dependent on their tax returns, despite the fact that I was financially independent and paying my own expenses. This fraudulent claim generated substantial tax refunds that they used for Amanda's education and their own discretionary spending. Even worse, they had opened several credit cards in my name without my knowledge or permission, using my good credit score to access additional funds. The statements showed purchases for Amanda's textbooks, laptop upgrades, and even vacation expenses. They had been building debt in my name while carefully managing their own credit to protect their hidden assets. I found receipts for expensive purchases. I had never authorized a $5,000 laptop for Amanda's advanced coursework, a $3,000 spring break trip to Mexico that Amanda had described as a study abroad program, even a $1,500 designer wardrobe for her internship interviews. All of it charged to credit cards bearing my name and social security number. The most infuriating discovery was a folder labeled Investment Planning, containing documents that outlined their long-term financial strategy. They had been consulting with a financial advisor about how to maximize Amanda's earning potential while minimizing their own tax liability. The plan explicitly discussed using my ongoing contributions to fund Amanda's graduate school education, professional development, and early career support. There were even projections showing how Amanda's future income as an environmental engineer would eventually support the family, allowing mom and dad to retire comfortably while I continued working construction to maintain their lifestyle. They had turned me into an unwitting investor in a scheme designed to transfer wealth from my labor to Amanda's career prospects. But perhaps the most painful document was a handwritten note from mom to dad, discussing their strategy for keeping me content in my role as family provider. The note read, "We need to make sure Karl doesn't get too ambitious about changing his situation. Amanda's success depends on having his financial support through graduate school. Maybe we should discourage him from taking those community college classes he mentioned. We can tell him the family needs his focus on work right now." They had been deliberately sabotaging my attempts at self-improvement, not because they thought I was incapable, but because my success threatened their carefully constructed plan to exploit my labor for Amanda's benefit. Every time I had expressed interest in returning to school or pursuing better opportunities, they had manufactured crises or obligations that required my continued sacrifice. I found emails between mom and Amanda discussing strategies for keeping me motivated to maintain my contributions. They talked about occasionally praising my work ethic to prevent resentment, while carefully avoiding any encouragement that might inspire me to seek alternatives to my current situation. They had studied how to manipulate my emotions and sense of family obligation to ensure my continued compliance. The evidence painted a picture of systematic fraud that went far beyond financial exploitation. They had committed identity theft by opening accounts in my name, tax fraud by claiming false dependents, and what could potentially be considered racketeering through their coordinated scheme to steal my labor and opportunities. But the emotional impact was far worse than any financial crime. These weren't desperate parents making difficult decisions to survive hard times. They were calculating fraudsters who had identified me as their most valuable asset and designed a comprehensive strategy to exploit my love and loyalty for their financial gain. Every moment of guilt I had felt about wanting more from life. Every sacrifice I had made believing it was temporary, every time I had suppressed my own dreams for the supposed greater good of family unity. All of it had been manipulation designed to keep me trapped in a role that served their interests while destroying my future. Reading through years of their private correspondence and financial planning, I realized that they had never seen me as a son and brother deserving of love and support. I was a resource to be managed and optimized, a source of income and labor that could be directed toward their preferred investment, Amanda's career prospects. The birthday vacation to Lake Tahoe wasn't a family tradition that I had been excluded from due to academic obligations. It was a celebration of their successful exploitation, a reward for another year of extracting value from my sacrifice while maintaining the illusion that I was a willing participant in family teamwork. Sitting in Dad's office, surrounded by evidence of years of systematic betrayal, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt and confusion that had dominated my emotions for so long began to crystallize into something much more powerful, righteous anger backed by clear understanding of exactly what had been done to me and how to respond. They had made one critical error in their elaborate deception. By documenting everything so thoroughly, they had created a comprehensive record of their crimes that could be used against them. Every fraudulent tax return, every unauthorized credit account, every stolen dollar. It was all carefully preserved in filing cabinets and computer files that I now had access to. Amanda thought she was the smart one in the family, but she had been careless with her digital security. Mom and Dad believed they had successfully convinced me of my own limitations, but they had underestimated my ability to understand complex financial and legal concepts. After all, I had been the environmental engineering student before I became their victim. For years, they had used my sense of family loyalty and responsibility against me, convincing me that my sacrifice was temporary and necessary. But now I understood that their plan required my permanent subjugation, and they had no intention of ever releasing me from my role as their financial servant. The evidence before me represented more than personal betrayal. It was proof of criminal fraud that could result in serious legal consequences. But more importantly, it gave me the power to reclaim control of my own life and future. The family that had spent years systematically destroying my opportunities was about to discover that their victim had more intelligence and determination than they had ever imagined. I spent the rest of Friday night and all of Saturday methodically documenting every piece of evidence I had discovered. Years of working construction had taught me the importance of thorough documentation and careful planning skills that were about to serve me in a completely different context. Using my phone, I photographed every relevant document in Dad's filing system, bank statements showing the hidden retirement income tax returns with fraudulent dependent claims, credit card statements for accounts opened in my name without permission, and the handwritten notes discussing strategies to keep me trapped in my current role. I created detailed screenshots of Amanda's emails, organizing them by category: academic theft, character assassination, to potential employers, sabotage of personal relationships, and coordination with our parents to maintain their deception. The digital evidence was even more damning than the financial records because it revealed the deliberate nature of their manipulation. But as I compiled this evidence, I began to realize that I possessed far more power than I had initially understood. My years of handling family finances hadn't just given me access to their secrets, it had made me a legal co-signer on multiple accounts and a documented contributor to assets that they had been treating as their exclusive property. The $60,000 in Amanda's future fund had been accumulated entirely from my earnings. Even though they had tried to disguise it as a family savings account, the paper trail clearly showed that every deposit came from my paychecks. Legally, this money belonged to me, and they had no right to restrict my access or designate it for Amanda's use without my consent. More importantly, my name appeared as a co-signer on several accounts that contained their hidden assets. Dad's early retirement package had been deposited into a joint account that listed me as a secondary holder, probably to avoid tax implications he hadn't fully understood. This meant I had legal access to funds they had been hiding from me for years. But the most powerful weapon in my arsenal was Amanda's academic fraud. 4 years of systematic plagiarism wasn't just unethical, it was a serious violation of academic integrity policies that could result in degree revocation, expulsion, and permanent notation on her academic record. Every scholarship she had received, every award she had won, every opportunity she had gained, all of it was built on stolen intellectual property that I could prove belonged to me. I still had my original research files stored on an external hard drive from my time at Colorado State. Comparing these files to Amanda's submitted work would provide undeniable evidence of plagiarism. The timestamps alone would prove that my work predated hers, and the sophisticated technical content would demonstrate that the theft involved substantial intellectual property, not just casual collaboration. Moreover, Amanda's theft constituted a pattern of academic fraud spanning multiple years and courses. Universities took such violations extremely seriously, especially when they involved scholarship recipients and students preparing for graduate school. A formal complaint backed by comprehensive evidence could trigger an investigation that would destroy Amanda's entire academic career. But I realized that Amanda's sabotage of my employment opportunities might constitute criminal interference with my economic prospects. By contacting potential employers with false and defamatory information, she had deliberately damaged my reputation and prevented me from pursuing legitimate opportunities. This could potentially be prosecuted as harassment defamation or interference with business relationships. The unauthorized credit accounts opened in my name constituted clear identity theft, a federal crime that could result in serious criminal charges. The fraudulent tax returns claiming me as a dependent while I was financially independent represented tax fraud that would interest the Internal Revenue Service. The systematic theft of my earnings under false pretenses could be prosecuted as fraud or embezzlement. I was sitting on evidence of multiple felonies committed by people who had spent years convincing me that I was the family failure lacking intelligence and ambition. They had systematically underestimated my capabilities while documenting their crimes in exhaustive detail. Sunday morning, I began implementing my response strategy. First, I contacted my bank and requested detailed records of all transactions related to joint accounts where my money had been deposited. I explained that I needed comprehensive documentation for potential legal proceedings, and they agreed to provide certified copies of all relevant statements. Next, I visited my old university's website and downloaded the academic integrity policies and procedures for reporting plagiarism violations. Colorado State had comprehensive guidelines for investigating intellectual property theft, including provisions for protecting whistleblowers and pursuing criminal charges when appropriate. I also researched the process for reporting tax fraud to the IRS and identity theft to federal authorities. The government agencies responsible for investigating these crimes had detailed procedures for accepting evidence and protecting victims while pursuing prosecution. But before taking any irreversible legal action, I decided to contact some of the employers who had rejected my applications after receiving Amanda's sabotaging emails. I wanted to understand the full scope of the damage she had done to my professional reputation and explore whether these opportunities might still be available if the truth were revealed. My first call was to the renewable energy company, where I had applied for an entry-level engineering position 8 months earlier. I spoke with the human resources manager who had handled my application, explaining that I had recently discovered false information had been provided about my background, and asking if they would be willing to reconsider my candidacy if I could provide documentation proving my actual qualifications. The response was immediate and encouraging. The HR manager remembered my application and admitted they had been impressed with my background, until they received the unsolicited character reference from Amanda. When I explained the family situation and offered to provide evidence of my actual work history and character, they agreed to schedule a new interview within the week. Similar calls to the environmental consulting firm and the company that had canceled my second interview yielded comparable results. In each case, hiring managers acknowledged that Amanda's character assassination had been the deciding factor in their rejection, and they expressed willingness to reconsider my candidacy if I could prove the information had been false and malicious. But the most surprising response came from my former university. When I called the admissions office to inquire about re-enrollment possibilities, I spoke with a counselor who had been tracking academic integrity violations across multiple institutions. She explained that plagiarism detection software had been flagging similarities between student work at different universities, and they had been investigating potential cases of intellectual property theft. When I described my situation and offered to provide evidence of Amanda's plagiarism, the counselor became extremely interested. She explained that my case could be part of a larger investigation into academic fraud, and she invited me to meet with the Academic Integrity Committee to discuss potential remedies for victims of educational theft. Most remarkably, she mentioned that the university had recently implemented a program for readmitting students whose education had been interrupted by documented family exploitation or fraud. If I could prove that my departure had been the result of systematic manipulation rather than academic failure or personal choice, they would consider offering me a full scholarship to complete my degree with credit for my proven research capabilities. The conversation with the university counselor revealed something I hadn't considered: my stolen intellectual property might actually be more valuable than I had realized. The research I had conducted on sustainable water management systems had apparently been groundbreaking enough to attract attention from multiple academic institutions. Amanda's success hadn't just been built on my work. It had been built on exceptionally high-quality work that demonstrated genuine innovation and expertise. This realization fundamentally changed how I viewed my situation. I wasn't just a victim seeking justice. I was a talented individual whose capabilities had been systematically suppressed and exploited by people who recognized my value, even while convincing me I had none. By Sunday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive case file, documenting every aspect of the fraud perpetrated against me. I had secured legal access to my stolen savings, gathered evidence of criminal activity, contacted potential employers who were willing to reconsider my applications, and identified educational opportunities that could restore the academic career that had been stolen from me. But most importantly, I had developed a strategic plan that would allow me to reclaim control of my future, while ensuring that the people who had exploited me faced appropriate consequences for their actions. The family that had spent years treating me like their personal ATM was about to discover that their victim possessed the intelligence, determination, and legal standing to fight back effectively. The birthday celebration at Lake Tahoe would be ending soon, and they would return home expecting to find Amanda's completed thesis and a compliant Karl ready to resume his role as family provider. Instead, they would find a man who had finally understood his true value and refused to accept exploitation disguised as family obligation. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes when you finally understand your true situation and have a concrete plan to address it. While my family continued their celebration at Lake Tahoe, completely unaware that their house of cards was about to collapse, I began implementing the most important decisions of my life. My first stop was the bank where our family accounts were held. Armed with documentation proving my co-signer status and records showing my exclusive contributions to the savings account, I met with the branch manager to discuss my options. The conversation was surprisingly straightforward. The $60,000 in Amanda's future fund was legally my money, and I had every right to withdraw it immediately. The branch manager reviewed the account history and confirmed that every deposit had originated from paychecks bearing my name. Despite the account's misleading title, The funds belonged to me under both state law and the bank's own policies. Within 30 minutes, I had transferred the entire amount to a new individual account that my family had no access to. But I didn't stop there. The joint account containing Dad's hidden retirement funds also listed me as a co-signer, and the branch manager confirmed that this gave me equal access to those assets as well. I withdrew an additional $40,000, the approximate amount I had unknowingly contributed to household expenses that were already covered by Dad's secret income. The withdrawals were completely legal and properly documented, but I knew they would send a clear message when my family discovered them. After years of taking my financial contributions for granted, they were about to learn that their access to my labor was not unconditional or permanent. From the bank, I drove directly to Colorado State University for my meeting with the Academic Integrity Committee. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation documenting Amanda's plagiarism, including side-by-side comparisons of her work with my original research file's timestamp evidence, proving my work predated hers, and detailed analysis showing the scope of intellectual property theft. The committee's response exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Not only did they find the evidence compelling, but they explained that Amanda's fraud was part of a larger pattern they had been investigating across multiple institutions. Apparently sophisticated plagiarism detection software had been flagging suspicious similarities in environmental engineering research, and my case provided the missing link they needed to understand the source. The committee chair explained that academic fraud of this scope typically resulted in degree revocation, expulsion, and permanent notation on academic records that would prevent future enrollment at any accredited institution. More importantly, they assured me that my status as the victim of intellectual property theft made me eligible for their new restoration program. Within hours, I was sitting in the admissions office completing paperwork for full re-enrollment with a complete academic scholarship. The university was so impressed with the quality of my original research that they offered to accept my stolen work as credit toward degree completion, potentially allowing me to graduate within 18 months rather than starting over. But the academic committee took an additional step that I hadn't anticipated. They immediately contacted Amanda's current university to report the plagiarism violation, providing comprehensive evidence and requesting a formal investigation. Academic institutions shared information about integrity violations, and Amanda's theft would be reported to every school where she had applied for graduate programs. My afternoon was spent at the offices of the employment attorney who specialized in cases involving workplace discrimination and interference with economic opportunities. After reviewing Amanda's emails to potential employers, the attorney confirmed that her actions constituted defamation and intentional interference with business relationships, both civil violations that could result in substantial financial damages. The attorney was particularly interested in the systematic nature of Amanda's sabotage and the clear evidence of malicious intent. He explained that employers had legal obligations to verify character references, and Amanda's false statements could expose both her and the companies that relied on them to liability for discrimination and wrongful rejection of qualified candidates. Most importantly, he agreed to contact each of the employers on my behalf, providing them with documentation of Amanda's fraud and formally requesting reconsideration of my applications. He explained that companies typically preferred to resolve such matters quietly rather than face potential lawsuits for relying on false information. The attorney also reviewed the evidence of identity theft and tax fraud, confirming that my family's actions constituted multiple federal crimes. He provided me with detailed instructions for reporting these violations to appropriate authorities and offered to represent me in any criminal proceedings that might result. From the attorney's office, I went directly to the local IRS office to file a formal complaint about fraudulent tax returns. The agent I met with was extremely interested in the case, explaining that dependent fraud was a serious violation that triggered automatic audits and substantial penalties. She accepted my evidence and assured me that a full investigation would begin immediately. I also filed reports with federal authorities about the identity theft, providing documentation about the unauthorized credit accounts, and fraudulent charges. The investigating agent explained that financial crimes involving family members were increasingly common and that they had comprehensive procedures for protecting victims while pursuing prosecution. But perhaps the most satisfying moment of the day came when I received calls from 3 different employers offering me interviews for positions that had previously been unavailable. The renewable energy company wanted to schedule an immediate meeting to discuss their entry-level engineering opening. The environmental consulting firm expressed interest in both full-time employment and contract work. Even the company that had canceled my second interview 8 months earlier reached out to apologize and offer a senior position that hadn't existed during my original application. The transformation was remarkable. Within a single day, I had gone from being the family failure trapped in manual labor to being a sought-after candidate with multiple professional opportunities and a clear path back to the education that had been stolen from me. But the day's most important accomplishment was completing Amanda's thesis, with my name as the primary author. I had taken her half-finished plagiarism and transformed it into a comprehensive analysis of sustainable water management systems that incorporated years of my original research and expertise. The work was genuinely innovative and represented the kind of breakthrough thinking that I had been prevented from pursuing for 4 years. The thesis would serve multiple purposes. It would provide Amanda's university with clear evidence of her fraudulent academic career. It would demonstrate my actual capabilities to potential employers and academic institutions, and it would establish legal documentation of my intellectual property rights to research that had been systematically stolen. By Monday evening, I had withdrawn over $100,000 from family accounts, triggered federal investigations into tax fraud and identity theft, destroyed Amanda's academic career through plagiarism reports, secured my readmission to university with full scholarship, obtained legal representation for civil and criminal proceedings, and generated multiple job opportunities that had been previously sabotaged. The speed and scope of these changes was possible only because I had spent years unknowingly documenting the very evidence needed to prove the crimes against me. My family's thoroughness in recording their exploitation had become the foundation for their own destruction. But I wasn't finished. Tuesday would bring even more dramatic changes as I continued to dismantle the infrastructure of manipulation that had controlled my life for 4 years. The family that had spent years convincing me of my limitations was about to discover just how capable and determined their victim actually was. As I sat in my newly independent apartment that I had rented with my recovered savings, I felt a sense of liberation that I hadn't experienced since dropping out of college. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on my own interests and capabilities, rather than the false obligations that had been imposed on me through manipulation and fraud. The birthday celebration at Lake Tahoe was scheduled to end Tuesday evening, and my family would return home Wednesday morning, expecting to find their compliant victim ready to resume his designated role. Instead, they would discover that their house of cards had completely collapsed while they were away, and that the brother and son they had taken for granted possessed the intelligence and determination to fight back decisively. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of anticipation that comes from knowing your life is about to change permanently. I'd spent Tuesday moving my belongings to the apartment I had rented, with my recovered savings leaving behind only the furniture and possessions that my family had purchased with money I now knew they had stolen from me. I positioned myself in the living room of the house I had financially supported for 4 years, surrounded by copies of all the evidence I had compiled, waiting for the moment when my family would walk through the front door and discover that their world had fundamentally shifted during their absence. They arrived just after 10 in the morning, chattering excitedly about their wonderful weekend at Lake Tahoe and Amanda's amazing birthday celebration. Mom was carrying shopping bags full of souvenirs and treats. Dad was discussing plans for their next family vacation, and Amanda was already talking about her thesis deadline as if I would naturally have completed her work while they enjoyed themselves. The conversation stopped abruptly when they noticed me sitting calmly at the dining table with organized stacks of documents spread before me. Amanda's completed thesis sat prominently in the center, but with my name listed as the author rather than hers. "Karl, what's all this paperwork?" Mom asked, her voice carrying the first hint of concern. "This is evidence," I replied calmly, "of 4 years of systematic fraud, theft, and manipulation perpetrated by this family against me." Amanda immediately moved toward her laptop, probably intending to check her accounts and emails, but I stopped her with a gesture toward the printed screenshots I had prepared. "Don't bother checking your computer," I said. "I've already documented everything. Your emails sabotaging my employment opportunities, your theft of my academic work, your coordination with Mom and Dad to keep me trapped in a role that served your interests while destroying my future." The color drained from Amanda's face as she recognized her own words printed on the pages before her. Dad stepped forward aggressively, clearly intending to assert his authority over what he perceived as an unacceptable challenge to family hierarchy. "You had no right to go through private family business," Dad said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had used for years to shut down my attempts at independence. "Actually," I replied, producing copies of the bank statements and tax documents, "I had every right. I'm a co-signer on the accounts you've been hiding money in. I'm the exclusive contributor to the savings account you designated for Amanda's future, and I'm the victim of identity theft and tax fraud that you've been committing in my name." I spread the financial documents across the table, showing them the evidence of their secret retirement income, their fraudulent tax claims, and the credit accounts they had opened in my name without permission. "This shows that Dad never lost his job," I continued. "You received a $150,000 early retirement package that you've been hiding while convincing me that my construction income was keeping the family afloat. Mom's been working full-time as a bookkeeper while claiming to struggle with part-time retail work. You've been stealing my earnings and using them to build Amanda's future, while committing multiple federal crimes in the process." Amanda finally found her voice, but her response revealed the same manipulative tactics she had been using for years. "Karl, you're obviously upset about something, but you're misunderstanding the situation," she said, adopting the condescending tone she used whenever she wanted to dismiss my concerns. "We've been trying to help you by giving you structure and purpose. Some people aren't cut out for academic life, and there's nothing wrong with finding fulfillment in practical work. Is that why you've been systematically sabotaging every opportunity I've tried to pursue?" I asked, producing the emails she had sent to potential employers. "Is that why you've been stealing my research and using it to build your own academic career? Is that why you convinced Mom and Dad that I was lazy and unmotivated while you were actively destroying my reputation behind my scenes?" I read aloud from several of her most damaging emails, watching as the reality of her documented betrayal became impossible to deny. Mom and Dad listened in growing horror as they realized the scope of manipulation they had been enabling. "Amanda told us you weren't really interested in school," Mom said weakly. "She said you preferred construction work and that you got frustrated when we suggested other options." "Amanda lied to you," I replied, "just like she's been lying to everyone else. She needed to keep me trapped in my current role because her entire academic career is built on stolen intellectual property. Every paper she's written, every scholarship she's received, every achievement she's celebrated, all of it is based on research and ideas that belong to me." I handed them copies of the plagiarism evidence showing side-by-side comparisons of Amanda's submitted work with my original research files. The timestamps and technical sophistication made the theft impossible to dispute. "The university has already begun their investigation," I continued. "Amanda's degree will be revoked. Her graduate school admission has been rescinded, and her academic career is finished." Every institution she's attended or applied to has been notified about the fraud. Amanda's composure finally cracked completely. "You can't do this to me," she screamed. "I've worked too hard to let you destroy everything out of jealousy." "You haven't worked at all," I replied calmly. "You've stolen 4 years of my work and convinced everyone that it demonstrated your intelligence and capabilities. But theft isn't work, Amanda. It's crime." Dad stepped forward again, clearly intending to intimidate me into backing down from my position. But I was prepared for this reaction. "Before you say anything threatening," I said, "you should know that I've already withdrawn the money you stole from my earnings. I've filed federal complaints about the tax fraud and identity theft, and I've retained legal representation for both civil and criminal proceedings. Everything you say from this point forward can and will be used as evidence against you." The fight seemed to drain out of Dad as the legal implications began to sink in. Mom started crying quietly, finally understanding that their elaborate deception had been discovered and documented in detail that could destroy them financially and potentially result in criminal prosecution. "What do you want from us?" Mom asked through her tears. "I want acknowledgement of what you've done," I replied. "I want public recognition that Amanda's academic achievements are fraudulent and that my intellectual property was stolen. I want repayment of the money you've taken from me under false pretenses. And I want genuine accountability for 4 years of systematic manipulation and exploitation." I explained that I had already secured my readmission to Colorado State with full scholarship, that multiple employers were offering me positions they had previously been convinced to deny me, and that I had independent housing and financial resources that eliminated my dependence on family support. "But most importantly," I concluded, "I want you to understand that your manipulation only worked because I loved this family and trusted you to have my best interests at heart. You exploited that love and trust to steal my future and transfer it to someone else. That betrayal has consequences that go far beyond money or career opportunities." Amanda made one final attempt to regain control of the narrative, appealing to Mom and Dad for support in dismissing my overreaction to what she characterized as normal family dynamics. But the evidence was too comprehensive and the legal implications too serious for them to continue enabling her manipulation. The conversation ended with Mom and Dad agreeing to cooperate with the investigations and to begin repaying the money they had stolen, while Amanda stormed out of the house, still refusing to accept responsibility for her actions. But her refusal to acknowledge her crimes no longer mattered. The legal and academic consequences would proceed regardless of her cooperation. Standing in the house I had unknowingly purchased with my own exploited labor, I felt a sense of closure that had nothing to do with revenge or punishment. For the first time in 4 years, I was seeing my family clearly, without the distorting lens of manipulation and false obligation that had prevented me from recognizing my own value and potential. The birthday celebration at Lake Tahoe had been their final moment of celebrating a system built on my exploitation. Now that system was dismantled, and each of us would have to face the reality of who we actually were without the comfortable lies that had sustained our family dynamics. 6 months have passed since that confrontational morning when I finally revealed the truth about our family's dynamics, and the transformation has been more profound than I ever imagined possible. The legal and academic investigations proceeded exactly as predicted, but the human consequences proved far more complex and ultimately more meaningful than simple justice or revenge. Amanda lost everything she had gained through fraud, but that loss became the catalyst for genuine change that surprised everyone, including me. Her degree was officially revoked, her graduate school admission was permanently rescinded, and her academic record now carries notation of systematic plagiarism that prevents her from enrolling at any accredited institution. The prestigious internships and job offers she had received were withdrawn once employers learned about the fraud. Initially, Amanda responded to these consequences with rage and denial, blaming me for destroying her future out of jealousy and resentment. She spent weeks trying to convince our parents and anyone who would listen that I had fabricated evidence or misrepresented normal family collaboration as theft. But the academic institutions and legal authorities who investigated her case found my documentation too comprehensive and credible to dispute. The turning point came when Amanda finally accepted a job as a receptionist at a local veterinary clinic, honest work that required no false credentials or stolen intellectual property. For the first time in her adult life, she was earning recognition based on her own efforts rather than my achievements. The humbling experience of starting over with entry-level responsibilities forced her to confront the reality that her previous success had been entirely fraudulent. Gradually, Amanda began to acknowledge the scope of her manipulation and theft. She started attending counseling sessions to understand why she had chosen systematic deception over honest effort, and she began making genuine attempts to develop her own skills and knowledge, rather than stealing from others. The process has been difficult and painful, but it has also been authentic in ways that her previous achievements never were. 3 months ago, Amanda approached me with a formal written apology that demonstrated real understanding of the harm she had caused. She acknowledged that her theft of my intellectual property had been deliberate and systematic, that her sabotage of my opportunities had been malicious and calculated, and that her manipulation of our parents had been designed to maintain her fraudulent lifestyle at my expense. More importantly, she offered to make concrete amends by publicly acknowledging her plagiarism to anyone who had been influenced by her false achievements by working to repair my professional reputation through honest character references and by contributing financially to my educational expenses through a structured repayment plan that would take years to complete. I accepted her apology and her offer of restitution not because I needed her money or validation, but because her willingness to face consequences honestly represented genuine growth that I wanted to encourage. The sister who had once been willing to destroy my future to maintain her own comfort was slowly becoming someone capable of authentic achievement and ethical behavior. Our parents' transformation followed a similar pattern of initial denial, followed by grudging acceptance and eventual genuine change. The financial investigations resulted in substantial penalties for tax fraud and demands for repayment of fraudulent refunds, but criminal prosecution was avoided through their cooperation with authorities and their agreement to make full restitution. Dad struggled initially with acknowledging that his early retirement deception had been motivated by selfish desires to avoid supporting my education while funding Amanda's fraudulent achievements. But the reality of facing potential criminal charges forced him to examine his choices honestly, and he gradually began to understand that his favoritism had damaged both his children in different ways. Mom's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic because she had been the primary enabler of Amanda's manipulation while convincing herself that she was protecting family harmony. Recognizing that her willingness to believe Amanda's lies about my character had contributed to years of exploitation forced her to confront her own biases and assumptions about her children's relative worth and potential. Both parents now attend family counseling sessions designed to address the toxic favoritism and manipulation that had characterized our family dynamics for years. They are learning to communicate honestly about expectations and obligations rather than using guilt and false crises to control behavior. The process has been awkward and sometimes painful, but it has also been more authentic than our family interactions had been in years. The financial restitution has been substantial but manageable through structured payment plans that acknowledge the scope of their theft while allowing them to rebuild their lives honestly. More importantly, they now treat me as an equal family member whose opinions and interests matter rather than as a resource to be managed and exploited for others' benefit. As for my own life, the changes have exceeded my most optimistic expectations. I graduated from Colorado State University summa cum laude with a degree in environmental engineering completing in 18 months, what would normally take 4 years because of the advanced credit I received for my original research. The thesis I wrote using my reclaimed intellectual property won the university's award for outstanding undergraduate research and has been published in a peer-reviewed journal. The job opportunities that materialized once Amanda's sabotage was exposed led to a position with a prestigious environmental consulting firm that specializes in sustainable water management systems. My work involves designing and implementing exactly the kind of innovative infrastructure projects I had dreamed about during my original college years. The salary is more than triple what I earned in construction, but more importantly, the work utilizes my actual capabilities and provides opportunities for continued growth and development. I've also been invited to speak at academic conferences about my research and to serve as a mentor for students pursuing environmental engineering careers. The recognition feels authentic because it's based on genuine achievement rather than stolen credentials or manipulated opportunities. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been in my understanding of family relationships and personal worth. The experience taught me that love without respect is manipulation, that sacrifice without appreciation is exploitation, and that family loyalty should never require the abandonment of personal growth and ambition. I learned that enabling others' selfish behavior, even when motivated by love and concern, ultimately harms everyone involved by preventing authentic development and honest relationships. My willingness to accept exploitation for years didn't protect family unity. It enabled dysfunction that ultimately damaged all of us. Most importantly, I discovered that my worth as a person never depended on their approval or recognition. The intelligence, creativity, and work ethic that I brought to my construction job were the same qualities that had made my original research valuable enough to steal. My capabilities hadn't changed during the years of manipulation. Only my understanding of those capabilities had been distorted by people who needed me to believe I was limited in order to maintain their control. The experience also taught me that fighting back against injustice isn't cruel or vindictive when it's done to protect your legitimate interests and hold people accountable for their choices. My family's exploitation only continued because I had accepted it as normal, and my decision to expose their fraud ultimately benefited everyone by forcing authentic change that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. Today, our family relationships are healthier than they've been since childhood, precisely because they're now based on honesty rather than manipulation. We spend time together because we choose to, not because artificial crises or false obligations compel us to maintain contact. We communicate about genuine interests and concerns rather than dancing around hidden agendas and ulterior motives. Amanda is slowly rebuilding her life based on honest effort and authentic achievement. She still has years of debt to repay and reputation to restore, but she's doing it through legitimate work that provides genuine satisfaction. Our parents are learning to appreciate the children they actually have rather than trying to manipulate us into serving roles they preferred. And I'm pursuing the career and life I always wanted free from the artificial limitations that had been imposed through systematic manipulation and fraud. The 4 years I lost to their exploitation can't be recovered. But the future I'm building is more solid and meaningful because it's based on authentic achievement and honest relationships. The most profound lesson I've learned is that family should be a source of support and encouragement for individual growth, not a mechanism for controlling and limiting each other's potential. True love means wanting the best possible future for the people you care about, even when that means accepting changes that might be inconvenient for your own plans and preferences. I want to ask you something that connects directly to this story. Have you ever found yourself sacrificing your dreams and ambitions for family members who seem to take your contributions for granted? Sometimes we convince ourselves that putting others first is always the right choice. But there's a crucial difference between temporary support during genuine crises and permanent acceptance of exploitation disguised as obligation. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced similar family dynamics? How did you recognize when support had become enabling or when love had become manipulation? Your insights could help other people who might be struggling with comparable situations. Please take a moment to like this video if you found value in Karl's journey from exploitation to empowerment. Subscribe to hear more stories about people who found the courage to reclaim their lives and futures when toxic relationships threaten to destroy their potential. And share this story with anyone who might benefit from understanding that their worth doesn't depend on other people's recognition or approval. Thank you for listening to this story about the importance of recognizing your own value and refusing to accept exploitation disguised as family obligation. I hope Karl's experience inspires you to pursue your authentic potential, build relationships based on mutual respect, and never let anyone convince you that your dreams are less important than their comfort. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable behavior that harms everyone involved, and that fighting for your legitimate interests isn't selfish when it's done with integrity and purpose.